god, I need a drink. One day, this won't be nerve-wracking, I swear. Today I want to do a quick November reading wrap-up and a NaNoWriMo wrap-up, seeing as November is over. And what a month it was. So I don't know about the rest of you, but November was rather difficult. It started out really strong. I was really excited. I filmed 3 videos. 2 of them got posted. The third, which was my November TBR, never did because the election happened. I don't know about you, but it took me the rest of the month to recover from that. Starting in November, I began participating in a read-along, and it's a Jane Austen read-along, and I will link the Goodreads group in the description bar down below. And the great thing about this read-along is we're reading one Jane Austen novel per month for the next 6 months. Jane Austen has long been one of my top 5 favorite authors, but I read her books over the course of about 10 years, so they were very spread out, and other than Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion, I've only read the other 4 once. So I'm participating in this read-along as a great way to refresh myself on her works that I am less familiar with, but that I do enjoy. November, the first book we read was Pride and Prejudice, which is one of my favorite books. I've mentioned it in my top 10 books that have influenced me as a writer. It's probably my most reread book of any book in my collection, or just any book in general. I read it for the first time when I was probably about 10 years old. I checked it out from my school library, loved it, was obsessed with it, have frequently reread it, not quite every year, but I would say every other year I have reread it, so I love it. I love it a lot, and I'm probably going to do an entire video on it, since it's part of a read-along, and I have a lot of feelings. I even wrote a note, and I'm not a note taker when I read books. I'm not a tabber, so that's quite fun. But before I do that, I really want to rewatch the Colin Firth, Jennifer Eel miniseries, because I haven't watched that in probably 8 or 9 years, since I was in high school or junior high. It's been a while, and I really want to compare it to the Keira Knightley version of the film, and talk about those 2 adaptations in conjunction with the book. So look out for that video. Hopefully it'll be coming later in the month. This was great. I loved rereading it. About the second week in November, right around the election, ironically, my internet, because I've been in the process of moving last month, the second half of last month, I shut my internet off because my contract ended, and I was without internet for a couple of days, and this saved my life. I read this in about 2 days because I was just like, I have no internet. You know, so it was great. Another thing I read last month, and this was not part of any read-alongs or readathons, in the course of packing and moving, I found a lot of books from a college class that I took 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, and I hadn't read all of the books for the class. It was probably a fiction class on crime novels. Anyways, it was a cool class. I did some of the reading for it. I didn't do all of the reading for it, but I found this stack of books that I had purchased for the class, and so since I like to write murder mysteries, I thought it'd be really fun to kind of slowly work through some of those books. And the first one I worked through as kind of a palate cleanser between reading Pride and Prejudice and starting my Tom Topple book was this book. It's called Double Indemnity by James M. Cain, and this is not very long. It's a very short, can hardly even call it a book. It's 115 pages. A little longer than a short story, a little bit short for a true novella, somewhere in there. And it is interesting. It's quite old. It was published in 1936. There's a movie, according to my dad. I've never seen it, but it was a man's book about a man. That's really all I can say. There's some the love word gets thrown around, and you're just like, no. It's solidly written and solidly constructed. It's not my cup of tea. The other 2 books I read last month, I don't have physical copies of. I checked them out from my library on ebook. I mentioned in my last wrap-up, I'm slowly working my way through all the Harry Potter books because I've never read them before. And so in November, I read books 3 and book 4. Book 3 I read at the beginning of the month. Book 4 I read as part of Tome Topple, which, if you don't know what Tome Topple is, it's a little readathon. It just ended December 1st, where you challenge yourself to read books of 500 pages or more. And obviously, The Goblet of Fire is more than 400 pages. So I want to talk briefly about these two books, because since it's my first read through, I have kind of like a lot of thoughts, and I've never really engaged with the Harry Potter fandom or the Harry Potter discussion over the years, so I've never really talked about them to anyone. So I'm sure I'm gonna say things that are like, people have said it before, but I will say it again. I saw all the movies long before I ever saw any of the book, or ever read any of the books. And I would say movie, the third film and the fifth film are probably my favorites. I also like the Deathly Hallows films, because one of the things is, like, I would say not just the acting, obviously the kids got better at acting as the films went along, but also just the script writing fluctuated. The quality of the script writing really fluctuated between the different films. And so some of the films are not as well written. For instance, I would say the Half-Blood Prince movie is really poorly put together. But that being said, I really do like The Prisoner of Azkaban, and I've always really liked The Order of the Phoenix. And so when I picked up a copy to read of The Prisoner of Azkaban, I was really expecting to love it. And it's okay. It's good. But ironically, I much preferred The Goblet of Fire. I thought the pacing in The Goblet of Fire was so much better. Like, even though it's a really long book, it was just so much more interesting from start to finish. And the thing I realized when I was reading The Prisoner of Azkaban is that, so a friend of mine, we were talking about Harry Potter and the Harry character, and her comment was, well, that's the point. Harry is supposed to be like just a normal everyman kid. He's not like some brilliant wizard. And I was like, yeah, okay, I get that. And that's fine. But he's like a normal, ordinary wizard who's just really into sports. If these books didn't have magic in them, he would be and now I can't speak like for British culture, because I don't know what the cultural equivalent of it is, but like the American cultural equivalent of this is, if these books didn't have magic in them, he'd be a football player with a tragic family history or a tragic family drama. And that's it. That's all it would be. And that's not my kind of thing. And so I felt this in book 2, and I felt it even stronger in book 3, and I felt it again in book 4. But the series as a whole would have been so much more interesting from Hermione's point of view. Like, even the fact, like, her having like this tragic best friend, I think would be more interesting from an outsider's perspective, because Harry and Ron are a little insufferable to read. And I think it's probably just because, like, I'm a woman and I'm 27 and I don't really care about boys and their sports problems, because that's it. There's 2 conflicts going on in these early books, and one of them is all of the stuff around Voldemort, which is really interesting, and why I think I really appreciate like the later movies, and I think I'm gonna like the later books more. And so you've got that storyline, and then you've got like Harry's Quidditch drama. And I'm not a big fan, I mentioned this in the last book, I'm not a big fan of Quidditch in general. I think it's the kind of sport that really irks me because of the rule breaking and the inconsistent refereeing and all this sort of stuff. It really bothers me, like on a kind of an OCD level. But then on top of that, I'm just not really super interested in sports. But so you've got those 2 things, and Harry spends so much of his time worrying about Quidditch, and you're like, of all the things you could be interested in, why are you interested in that? Like, there's like 150 pages, I think, of Prisoner of Azkaban that's just like Harry angsting over Quidditch and playing Quidditch, and I'm just like, I'm so sick of this. And I could definitely tell in that book there was a point at which, if I didn't know what was coming, if I didn't know like the story, if I didn't come into the book already having an emotional attachment to the characters Sirius and Remus, which, oh man, I have so many feelings. But like, if I hadn't come into the book with those pre-prejudices, I have a feeling that is the book, Prisoner of Azkaban. But halfway through it, I would have gotten bored, set it down, and forgotten I was reading it. And it would have taken me a long time to read, unfortunately. However, Goblet of Fire was, because it didn't have Quidditch, because Quidditch was canceled that school year, you never had any of those really long, boring sports passages, and so overall the book moved much faster for me. I think the books in general would have been better from Hermione's perspective. I think she has a more interesting perspective, especially considering, especially in these early books, she's doing most of like really interesting stuff. Like I said this in the Chamber of Secrets, I thought that book would have been more interesting from her perspective too, because she's the one who figures it out, that it's a basilisk, which is great. Like, I have kind of a lengthy Goodreads review of the Goblet of Fire. I'll leave a link to my Goodreads review, and you can read my more complicated thoughts in over there. I liked Goblet of Fire. I liked parts of Prisoner of Azkaban. The end of Prisoner of Azkaban is so good. See, that's the thing that kind of kills me about the pacing of that book. The beginning is kind of interesting. Though I wonder if the beginning, I think the beginning is so interesting to me because I know what's happening and because I came in with it prejudices about how I felt about some of the characters. The middle drags awful, and it's only like a 325-page book. It's not even that long compared to some of the other ones. And then the last, 4 chapters are really great. Like once you get the Whomping Willow and like the Shrieking Shack and the end, it's really interesting. Again, it picks up, and I flew through the end. Final note, I love Crookshanks so much. Oh my gosh. It's one of those animals, I do genuinely wish had been more present in the films, because man, Crookshanks is such a cool character. I never thought I'd say that about a cat who can't speak, but Crookshanks is cool. Those are the books I read in November. Those are some of my thoughts about them. Now I'm going to switch tracks and talk briefly about NaNoWriMo. So NaNoWriMo went really great. I finished on the 28th, I think, 2 days early. I started off really strong. I was originally trying to write 60,000 words in the month. Pushed myself a little bit harder because I wrote 60,000 words in October. However, as I mentioned at the top of the video, the election happened, and it really threw off my writing. I took most of the second week off, and off to me is like I only wrote, 500 words a day instead of 2,000 to 3,000 words a day. I did catch up again in the 3rd week, and I stayed a little bit ahead of the curve for the rest of the month, but I finished the month with 52,000 words total, according to the website's validator, which is still totally respectable. December is going to be an editing month. Obviously, I've got that 105,000 word monstrosity to edit, so I can send it to my editor, and then I've got 2 books coming back from editors that I have to edit. So much editing. That is what I did in November. It was a busy month. I also moved, and so yeah, it was a busy month, but I got all that stuff done. And yeah, so thanks for watching. If you want to chat, you can follow me on Twitter, or you can leave a comment down below, and I'd love to hear from you. See ya!